My name is Lena Carson, and last November my entire world unraveled in a single afternoon. It had already been a difficult year. I lost my job as a senior design assistant at an architecture firm in Seattle when the company downsized after a massive merger. I'd spent 6 years building my reputation there, working nights and weekends, pouring everything I had into that job. But in the end, it didn't matter. I was one of the first to go. Rent in the city became impossible without a steady income, and unemployment barely covered groceries. After weeks of job hunting, mounting bills, and no callbacks, I swallowed my pride and called home. It wasn't an easy decision. My relationship with my family, especially my mother and older sister Vanessa, had always been strained. Growing up in Houston, I was the creative one in a household that worshipped structure, success, and traditional career paths. My sister had followed the blueprint perfectly: medical school, residency, marriage to a successful accountant. She was the golden child. I was the cautionary tale. Still, I had nowhere else to go. 3 months, I told my mom over the phone, just until I get back on my feet. There was a long pause before she finally said, "Fine, but don't expect special treatment." When I arrived at the house I'd grown up in, everything looked the same, but it didn't feel like home. Vanessa was visiting the first weekend I came back. Over dinner, she smiled that condescending smile of hers and said, "At least you get a break, right? Some people can't afford to stop working." I wanted to scream. She had no idea what it felt like to start over with nothing. My parents just nodded along with her, occasionally asking when I'd finally consider going back to school for something more practical. They said it with the same polite tone people use when suggesting a failed artist should become a real estate agent. Every day under their roof felt like walking on broken glass. I offered to pay for groceries, helped around the house, and applied for jobs nonstop, but no effort was ever enough. "You just don't try hard enough," my mom muttered one morning after I got another rejection email. My dad barely spoke unless it was to ask why I hadn't landed a real interview yet. And Vanessa. She texted me articles about local job fairs and motivational podcasts with captions like, "Maybe this will help." The breaking point came after a particularly humiliating dinner. My mother had made one of her signature passive-aggressive comments about some people not contributing, and Vanessa chimed in with a jab about how everyone has hard years, but responsible adults make it work. I couldn't hold it in. I stood up and said, "You know what? I'm not staying here to be insulted every day. I have an interview tomorrow morning. I'll be gone all day, and when I come back, maybe you all will have remembered what basic decency looks like." I left the table and walked out before they could respond. That night, I stayed with my friend Jade, a law school classmate from college, who'd recently passed the bar. She let me crash on her couch, handed me a glass of wine, and said, "Don't let them shrink you. You're better than that." The next morning, I put on my one decent blazer, printed out my resume, and went to a job interview at a mid-sized design firm downtown. It wasn't my dream company, but it was a chance. The interview went well better than expected, and for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Like maybe I could pull myself out of this freefall. I drove back to my parents' house that afternoon, rehearsing what I might say. I'll thank them for letting me stay. I'll tell them about the interview. Maybe this can still work out. I pulled into the driveway around 4 p.m. The house was quiet, the lawn freshly mowed. Nothing seemed out of place, until I put my key in the front door. It didn't turn. I jiggled it, tried again. Still nothing. My stomach tightened. Maybe the lock jammed. I walked to the side entrance, tried that key. Same result. Panic crept in slowly. I tried the back door. No luck. Then I checked my phone. One new message. From Mom. The preview alone made my heart stop. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore." I opened the full message, hands trembling. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now." Ha ha. My vision blurred. I blinked hard, trying to understand. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I called her, straight to voicemail, called Dad. Same thing, called Vanessa. No answer. I stood in the driveway, too stunned to cry, too humiliated to scream. They had actually locked me out. Everything I owned was inside that house. My clothes, my portfolio, my laptop, my ID, my social security card, everything. I took a shaky breath and texted my mom back. How funny. How brave you think you are. It wasn't courage, it was cruelty, dressed up as a lesson. I sat in my car staring at the house I grew up in, realizing that I was no longer welcome there, not even temporarily, not even with nowhere else to go. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from Jade. You okay? I didn't even hesitate. No. They locked me out. 5 minutes later, I was driving back to her place. I couldn't feel my fingers on the steering wheel. My head throbbed. My world had tilted on its axis. This was more than a power play. It was betrayal. But what I didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that they had just made a mistake. A big one. And in less than 48 hours, a message from a lawyer would prove it. Jade didn't ask questions when I showed up on her doorstep with red eyes and trembling hands. She opened the door, wrapped me in a blanket, and handed me a mug of peppermint tea. They really did it, she asked quietly after I finished explaining. I nodded. All my stuff is in that house. My IDs, my portfolio, my resume files, everything. That's not just cruel, she said, her voice sharp with anger. That's illegal. They can't just lock you out like that. Tell that to them, I muttered. We sat in silence for a while. Her tiny apartment, barely 600 square feet, felt warmer than my childhood home ever had. Her walls were covered in books and framed prints from indie artists. It felt lived in, welcoming, safe. By contrast, my parents' house, despite its size and suburban perfection, always felt like a showroom. Immaculate, silent, and full of rules. I thought back to growing up there, the constant comparison, the suffocating expectations. Vanessa was always the benchmark. Straight A's, first chair in orchestra, prom queen, full ride to medical school. She didn't just meet expectations, she defined them. And I was always the other one, the artistic one, the messy one, the girl who covered her bedroom walls with magazine clippings and paint samples, who skipped pep rallies to sketch buildings in her notebook, who wanted to design spaces that felt like home because the one she lived in never quite did. I still remember the day I told my parents I was going to study interior architecture. My dad leaned back in his chair and said, "That's not a real career. It's a hobby." My mother folded her napkin slowly and added, "Vanessa is applying to med school. Why don't you do something practical too?" I tried to explain. I showed them articles, portfolio samples, told them how design could change lives. They didn't listen. Eventually, I stopped trying to prove myself and started proving them wrong by doing everything without their help. I took out loans, worked at a coffee shop, interned at design studios during summers. I graduated top of my class, landed a great job, rented my own apartment, paid off one of my loans. Still, the phone calls from home were filled with cold commentary. "Are you dating anyone serious yet? Your cousin just bought her first house. I heard Vanessa might be getting a fellowship in Boston." Nothing I did was ever enough, and when I lost my job, the narrative shifted instantly. See, my mother had said during one phone call, "Maybe now you'll consider a real career." So when I called her and asked to move back in for a while, I knew what it would cost me. I just didn't think it would cost everything. Living under their roof again was like rewinding my adulthood. The rules, the judgment, the subtle digs at every meal. Vanessa stopped by frequently and always made sure to ask about my job search in front of our parents. One night I heard her say to my mom in the hallway, "She's almost 30 and still doesn't have her life together. You're enabling her." My mother's reply, "We'll give her time, but not forever." I pretended I didn't hear it. But it stuck with me. Still, I kept applying, kept hoping. That interview I'd gone to the day I was locked out, it was my fifth in 2 months, and the only one that had felt remotely promising. Now I had no home, no access to my documents, no idea what to do next. The next day, I returned to the house while my parents were at work, hoping to catch someone coming or going. Instead, I found a manila envelope taped to the front door. Inside was a printed letter. "You are no longer permitted to enter this residence. Your belongings will be boxed and made available for pickup on Saturday between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Any attempt to enter the property will be considered trespassing." It wasn't signed. No name, no warmth, just typed like a business memo. I stood there frozen, heart pounding, until Mrs. Bennett, our neighbor from 3 houses down, walked by with her dog and stopped when she saw me. Lena, are you all right? I hesitated, then said, They changed the locks. They're kicking me out. Her mouth tightened. She looked toward the house, then back at me. That doesn't surprise me, she said finally. Your mother always did favor Vanessa. She said I could stay until I got back on my feet, I whispered. And now… I'm sorry, dear, she said, her voice softening. Your grandmother would be heartbroken. The mention of my grandmother hit me like a punch to the chest. Grandma Ruth, my mother's mother, the only person in the family who ever saw me. She'd passed away 6 years earlier after a brief illness. A sharp, funny, fiercely independent woman who had spent her retirement years restoring old houses and flipping properties. She was the one who encouraged my love for design, who let me rearrange her furniture at age 10, who mailed me clippings about architecture programs from across the country. She was my person, my safe place. I remember visiting her during college breaks. She'd pat my hand and say, Some people build walls. You build windows. Don't ever let them convince you the world's too dark to see through. When she died, my mother took over all the estate paperwork. I hadn't asked questions. I was too young, too overwhelmed with grief. I assumed everything had gone to my parents. After all, that's what everyone said. That night, sitting on Jade's couch with the envelope still in my lap, I told her about Grandma Ruth. She loved real estate, I said. She had 3 houses at one point, did everything herself, never took crap from anyone. Jade leaned forward. Wait, are you sure the house your parents live in wasn't hers originally? I blinked. Yeah, she bought it after Grandpa died. Lived there a while before moving into assisted living. And it was paid off when she died, I think so. Jade was already pulling out her laptop. Then it may still be under a family trust. And if that's true, she didn't finish. She just typed. Fast. 15 minutes later, she looked up. Lena, you're not going to believe this. She turned the screen toward me. There it was, black and white. The Carson Family Living Trust, filed in 2014. Owner of record Ruth Carson. Current legal trustees Patricia Carson and Vanessa Lee Carson. Beneficiary Lena Carson. My name. Right there. What does this mean? I asked, barely breathing. It means, Jade said slowly, that they can't legally kick you out if the property is still under trust and the trust terms guarantee your residential rights. But they changed the locks. They left me that letter. She nodded grimly. Which might be a direct violation of the trust. If that document includes provisions that allow you access as a family beneficiary in need, they're in serious legal trouble. My head was spinning. They boxed my stuff up, I whispered, like I was trash. They may have just made the biggest mistake of their lives, Jade said. She clicked again, downloaded the full trust filing, scanned for conditions, found them. I read the section aloud. The beneficiary, Lena Carson, shall be granted temporary residential rights at the primary property in cases of financial hardship or life transition, provided her needs do not interfere with the safety or stability of the household. Under no circumstance shall the trustee unilaterally deny access without due process. My hands shook. They broke the law. Jade nodded. They broke the trust. Literally. We sat in silence. I wasn't just some freeloading adult child trying to coast on my parents' generosity. I had legal standing. I had rights. And thanks to my grandmother, who had seen me, believed in me, and planned ahead, I had something else too. Power. For the first time in weeks, I felt something new growing inside me. Not fear, not shame. Fire. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jade moved quickly. That night, she drafted a formal notice of violation citing the specific clauses from the Carson Family Living Trust. She had a colleague, an older, more experienced attorney, review the language to ensure it carried weight. The next morning, we printed 3 copies and drove to my parents' neighborhood. I stayed in the car while Jade walked up to the front door and handed the envelope to my father, who had just stepped outside to collect the paper. From where I sat, I saw the moment he read the first line. His eyebrows lifted and his mouth tightened into a narrow line. He didn't say a word to Jade, just shut the door behind him. They didn't expect you to fight back, Jade said, as she buckled her seatbelt. Good, I replied. Let them be surprised. We sent a second copy to Vanessa's office at the hospital, and a third to their family lawyer, just to be thorough. Jade told me not to respond to any texts or calls from them directly. Let the legal process handle it, she said. No more emotional back and forth. By late afternoon, the messages began pouring in. From my mother, Lena. What on earth is this letter? Why are you turning this into a legal issue? From my father. We've taken care of you for years. This is how you repay us. From Vanessa. This is completely unnecessary and frankly pathetic. We didn't kick you out. We just needed space. Jade reminded me to forward everything to her and not engage. You have leverage now, she said. Don't hand it back. That night, she stayed up with me as we reviewed the full trust documents she had pulled from public records. They were detailed and comprehensive. My grandmother had anticipated almost every scenario. There were conditional clauses, enforcement steps, and even financial repercussions. If any trustee was found violating the terms of the trust, especially by blocking a beneficiary's access, they could be removed by court order. There were provisions for mediation, conditions for transferring management to a neutral third party, guidelines for accessing a secondary trust and education and career development fund specifically designated in my name. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I worked 3 jobs through college, I said slowly. I went without textbooks some semesters. I maxed out my credit card just to buy a laptop for my design class. Jade looked at me, her expression tight. And according to these records, she said, pointing at one highlighted section, your parents received quarterly notices about this fund's existence. They just never told you. I felt sick. They took that money, I whispered. They've been using it. Haven't they? Looks like it, she confirmed. See this line here? It says, distributions were made over the last 5 years under trustee authorization. I leaned back on the couch staring at the ceiling. They watched me drown, I said, and they held the rope the whole time. The next morning, Jade reached out to a trust law firm she had interned with during law school. They specialized in family estate disputes and offered a free consultation. She scheduled a meeting for us that Friday. In the meantime, we began compiling everything, screenshots, copies of the trust evidence, of the lockout emails, text messages, and screenshots of my mother's message, the one that started it all. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. Ha ha! Jade highlighted the word we. They're admitting intent, she said. This isn't just emotional neglect. This is strategic exclusion. They thought you wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. The meeting at the law firm felt surreal. The office was sleek and intimidating, dark wood paneling, glass conference rooms, and a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a movie. The senior partner, a woman named Lauren Hughes, met us in a quiet meeting room on the 14th floor. She listened carefully as we explained the situation, flipping through the documents we provided. When I finished speaking, she looked directly at me and said, Miss Carson, this is one of the clearest cases of trustee violation I've seen in years. She went on to explain our options. We can file a petition for immediate injunction, which would legally restore your access to the property until a formal hearing. We can also request an audit of all trust-related expenditures for the last 5 years. And we can submit a motion to have both your mother and sister removed as trustees. What happens if the court agrees? I asked. You'd have full residential rights immediately, she said. They'd lose all decision-making power related to the property. And depending on what the audit uncovers, you may be entitled to restitution. I stared at her. You mean they might have to pay me back? For any funds used outside the scope of the trust's terms, yes. I exhaled slowly. It was almost too much to process. Lauren gave me 24 hours to decide whether to move forward formally. Think carefully, she said. Once we file, there's no turning back. This will change your family dynamic forever. I didn't need 24 hours. I want to move forward, I said. Lauren nodded. Then we begin now. Over the next few days, legal notices were served. My parents were officially informed of the audit. Vanessa was notified of the petition to remove her as co-trustee. Court hearings were scheduled. The law firm coordinated everything. The day after the filings were delivered, Vanessa called me for the first time since the lockout. "Lena, what are you doing?" she demanded. "You're destroying the family over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I said, my voice cold. "You changed the locks. You used my money. You kicked me out of a house my grandmother meant for all of us. You're twisting everything," she snapped. "No," I said. "I'm untwisting it." She hung up. 2 hours later, my mother texted me. We had no idea about all those conditions. We thought everything was transferred to us after Ruth passed. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my email and saw a message from Lauren. Subject: personal letter from Ruth Carson. Attached was a scanned copy of a handwritten note. Lauren explained they'd found it in the trust files written by my grandmother and dated 2 weeks before her death. It read, "My dearest Lena, if you are reading this, something has gone wrong. I've watched your strength from afar and always believed in your light. But I've also seen how it's been dimmed by the people around you. This house, this trust is my way of keeping a window open for you. Not just a place to sleep, but a place to return to when you're tired of fighting alone. I cannot control what others will do after I'm gone, but I can leave you this protection. Not because you're weak, but because the world is too harsh on women who dare to walk their own path. Do not let them make you small. With all my love, Grandma Ruth." I read the letter 5 times. The words blurred as tears streamed down my face. She had seen it all. She had known, and she had acted. That weekend, I was granted temporary access to the house. A court-appointed officer accompanied me to retrieve my belongings. My parents were not home. The place felt colder than I remembered. I walked through the rooms with a numbness I couldn't describe. Vanessa's diplomas still hung proudly in the hallway. My childhood bedroom had been emptied. My boxes were stacked in the garage. I took only what mattered: my portfolio, my documents, my grandmother's old sewing machine. The officer noted every item and signed off. It was transactional, clinical. But for me, it was something else. Closure. A week later, Lauren sent over the results of the initial audit. More than $65,000 had been withdrawn from the education fund over 3 years, used to pay for renovations to Vanessa's condo, a vacation property my parents had invested in, and several high-end purchases listed as home expenses, all from money intended to support my education, my career, my growth. Lauren filed the motion for restitution. The court scheduled a full hearing for the following month, but by then the tide had already turned. My parents' lawyer reached out for settlement. They offered to step down as trustees if we dropped the restitution claim. Lauren countered. They would step down, pay back 30% of the withdrawn funds, and transfer oversight to a neutral financial firm. They agreed. I didn't even feel triumphant. I just felt free. Free from needing their approval. Free from shrinking myself to keep the peace. Free from pretending their love was unconditional. In the weeks that followed, I used part of the recovered funds to rent a small studio and begin rebuilding my design portfolio. Jade and I went out for tacos and laughed until we cried. "You burned it down," she said, "and now you get to build it back your way." I nodded. "I just wish Grandma could see it." "She does," Jade said. "You know she does." And somehow I believed her. Because every time I open a notebook, sketch a space, or walk into the sunlight without apologizing for taking up room, I feel her there. The woman who gave me a way out. And the courage to take it. 3 months later, I stood in the middle of my new studio apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the smell of fresh paint. The place wasn't fancy. Just a 1-bedroom unit above a small florist shop in Montrose. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing in borrowed space or surviving in someone else's shadow. I was building something of my own. The rent was covered, at least temporarily, by a transitional stipend negotiated as part of the settlement with the trust. It wasn't a handout. It was money my grandmother had set aside for me. Money I should have had access to years ago. Now, it was finally being used for its intended purpose, helping me regain my footing. The studio's living room doubled as my workspace. My desk sat near the window where sunlight poured in each morning and lit up the fabric swatches and design boards spread across the surface. A corkboard on the wall held inspirational quotes, rough sketches, and one old photograph my grandmother Ruth standing in front of one of the houses she restored in her 60s hands, on her hips, eyes full of purpose. Every time I looked at it, I felt steadier. My days had a rhythm again. I'd picked up a few freelance design projects, including a small kitchen remodel and a nursery redesign for a couple expecting twins. Nothing big yet, but it was enough to remind me why I loved what I did, transforming spaces into something personal and healing. One morning, I received an email from a local nonprofit that offered grants to women in transition. They loved my proposal for community-centered interior spaces, and they invited me to pitch in person. I almost cried reading their response. Later that same day, I received a text from my father. "Let us know if you'd like to come by for Sunday dinner. We're keeping it low-key. Just family." I stared at the message for a while. It was the first time he'd reached out since the legal battle ended. I didn't respond right away. 2 days later, Vanessa called. "I didn't think you'd pick up," she said when I answered. "I almost didn't," I replied, staring out the window. There was a pause. "Look," she said, her tone unusually even. "I want to say I'm sorry. For what happened. For everything. You didn't just hurt me," I said. "You used money meant for my education to renovate your condo. You treated me like a mistake." "I know," she said quietly. "And I have no excuse for it. I was wrong." Another pause. "I thought I was doing what was best for the family, what Mom and Dad wanted. I didn't think about what Grandma wanted or what you needed." "That's the problem," I said. "No one ever did." "I can't undo it," she said. "But I'm trying to see things differently now. I started therapy last month. It's not much, but it's a start." I let that sit. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But maybe it was something else. A crack in the wall we'd both grown up behind. "I hope you keep going," I said. "Yeah," she whispered. "Me too." We hung up a few minutes later. And for the first time in years, the silence that followed wasn't filled with bitterness. It was still, calm. A few weeks later, I did go to Sunday dinner. It was awkward. My mother barely met my eyes at first. My father kept things polite. Vanessa was overly cheerful, like she was trying too hard. But no one raised their voice. No one made passive-aggressive comments. And when I stood up to leave, my mother followed me to the door. "I didn't know about the education fund," she said quietly. "I trusted Vanessa and your father with all that paperwork. I should have looked closer." I looked at her, unsure what to say. "I'm not saying that to excuse anything," she added. "I just want you to know I regret how it all happened, especially the way we handled things that day." "You locked me out," I said, like I was nothing. She looked down. "I was angry, afraid you'd never get it together. And I didn't know how to help you without feeling like I was enabling you." I took a breath. "Then maybe next time ask what I need. Don't assume I'm failing just because I'm not doing it your way." She nodded slowly. "That's fair." It wasn't an apology in so many words, but it was more than I expected. That night I wrote a letter to my grandmother. Not to send, just to say what I needed to say. I told her I missed her. That I was finally using my design skills again. That I'd found my feet. That her trust, both legal and emotional, had saved me. At the bottom, I wrote the one thing I never had the chance to say before she passed. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." In the months that followed, I continued rebuilding. I enrolled in a 6-month business course using the remaining funds from the trust. I learned how to pitch to clients, manage finances, and scale a creative business. I wasn't just designing anymore. I was becoming my own boss. Trevor, my cousin from Austin, reached out after hearing about everything. He told me he'd always felt out of place too, like he had to play a role just to keep the peace. We started talking regularly, shared stories, laughed about our childhood Thanksgivings and the weird family dynamics we never understood until we were adults. He even asked me to redesign the guest room in his house now that he was turning it into a home office. "You're the real deal," he told me after I sent over the mood board. "Grandma would be proud." I smiled. I think she is. One Saturday, I returned to the old neighborhood to have tea with Mrs. Bennett, the neighbor who had stopped to check on me the day I was locked out. She'd known my grandmother for decades. "She always said you were the bold one," Mrs. Bennett said, handing me a steaming cup. Didn't care what people thought. Ruth admired that. "She saved me," I said softly. "She knew she might need to," she replied. Your mother's always been rigid. Ruth hoped one day you'd find your own way through. I looked out at the garden. The same roses my grandmother had planted still bloomed along the fence. She gave me the tools I said. All I had to do was use them. Mrs. Bennet smiled. That's all any of us can do. Before I left, she pressed a small envelope into my hand. I found this in one of Ruth's old gardening books, she said. Figured you should have it. Inside was a faded Polaroid of me at age 10, grinning beside Grandma Ruth in the backyard, both of us covered in paint and dirt mid-renovation of her shed. On the back, in her neat handwriting, were 6 words. She sees. She tries. She builds. I held it like a relic, a reminder that long before I had a title, a career, or a plan, I had a spirit that couldn't be boxed in. That was who I really was. And now I was building again on my terms with my vision, and with a foundation my grandmother had poured for me long before I knew how much I'd need it. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's this. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones least capable of seeing us clearly. And sometimes the people who see us best are the ones who prepare us for a battle we never knew we'd fight. My grandmother couldn't protect me from the pain, but she gave me the tools to survive it. And now, finally, I've built something that no one can take away. My life, my worth, my home. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This wasn't an easy story to tell. It's not just about being locked out of a house, it's about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you try to control you instead. It's about the quiet damage of being underestimated, of being compared, of being told over and over that your path doesn't count because it doesn't look like theirs. But it's also about something more important. It's about the power of preparation, the power of one person, like my grandmother who believed in me enough to put protections in place before I even knew I'd need them. She didn't just leave behind money or property. She left a message. You are worthy. You are capable. You deserve space. For a long time, I thought strength meant never needing help. But what I've learned is that real strength is claiming the help that was left for you without shame. Real strength is standing your ground even if it means standing alone. And sometimes strength means walking away from people who only love you under certain conditions. I don't know where you are in your story. Maybe you're in the middle of a fight you didn't ask for. Maybe you've been pushed aside, told to shrink, or treated like you're not enough. If that's you, I just want to say I see you, I've been you, and you're not alone. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your experience, your version of standing up, walking away, or finally taking back your power. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I'll be sharing more stories about growth family healing and building something better from the pieces. Because you don't need anyone's permission to take up space. You just need the courage to say, this is my life. I'm not giving it away. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the family we choose starts with choosing ourselves.